Harley Davidson involved in modern slavery? Let's get into this.
RevelatorAlf.
Hello, welcome to RevelatorAlf. I hope you're all well. So this video is all about Harley Davidson involved in modern slavery. Now, surely this cannot be true. I don't want to believe it, and I know it cannot be true. However, so as we know, Harley Davidson had to shut down their plants for a few weeks, a couple of weeks, due to supply chain issues. Now, supply chain has become the new buzzword, hasn't it? But we know that one of their providers had some kind of issue that didn't fall in line with company policy. It's a bit vague, actually, what that problem was, but then it got me thinking. And then I started to do a bit of digging. Now, if you do an internet search of Harley Davidson modern slavery or modern slavery automotive industry, right, you'll get a whole raft of literature from government policy, government legislation, let's say, corporate policy, and also local policy as well. If you just search for Harley Davidson modern slavery, you'll actually see that Harley Davidson as a corporation have a policy on this, and you can download it as a PDF, and it's all very good, and it stipulates how their providers should act and how the checks are done and all this kind of stuff. You might also find particular dealerships, let's say, they have a modern slavery policy as well. And that could either fall in line with the corporate policy, that is in line with US legislation, or if it's a dealership operating, let's say, the UK or Europe, then that policy will fall in line with European or UK policy. You get my drift, right? Now, of course, this can apply to all automotive manufacturers. In fact, it can apply to all manufacturing industries, whether it's electronics, electrical, automotive, whatever. But here's the thing, Harley Davidson were the ones that actually closed down their plant for a particular provider's issues. What they were could have been due to a whole variety of things. There are lots of variables here, but one of the things that's happened since COVID, especially, that we know that the whole supply chain issues have been really affected, and obviously ongoing conflicts, especially in Ukraine now, that is affecting a lot of this source provision or raw material source provision. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that companies like Harley Davidson, they once had a provider of their components, let's say, and they have to do checks and balances on that provider. They've got to make sure that they're not doing anything that's against any law, not doing anything against any modern slavery, any bribery, corruption, all that kind of stuff. And this is standard corporate policy, and it happens all over the world, okay? But they'll be looking at the first level or the first tier of their providers, their component providers, let's say. They may even look at a second tier and a third tier. In other words, a company will provide them with products, with components, and then they'll look at who's providing products and components to that company, and possibly, depending how deep they want to go into this, they may go to a third level, third tier, to see who's providing the provider of the provider. You get my drift? Okay, so what's happened in the last couple of years, that a lot of that has been disrupted. So that means as companies, as corporations, but also as providers of companies, manufacturing companies, they've had to resource materials. And it's this area that's become a little bit grey. Now, if you look at the literature in the automotive industry, they acknowledge it can get quite grey when it comes to the raw material providers and how that is gathered. Now, we're talking usually about poorer countries where they have these natural raw materials, and well, we just don't know what goes on in some of those places. So yeah, it's a bit of a minefield, really, and it's a tricky task for any company, but a company like Harley Davidson, who have just had to close down their plants for a couple of weeks because of a supply chain issue. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that they have any knowledge of this or they've been involved in anything, but what I'm saying is that this could have actually happened, and this is why they've had to maybe have a rethink about certain providers of components, let's say. But let's not be under any illusion here. If we're just talking about the manufacturing of their motorcycles, that's one thing. but they're also involved in merchandise. So where is that merchandise made? Where is it sourced from? So, you know, modern slavery can mean lots of different things. It can mean, obviously, slavery, as it were, but it can mean that somebody has been exploited in terms of pay and conditions as well. And when we're talking about that, again, that can get quite tricky and grey for some people, because you can say, well, that's another country, their standard of living or cost of living is really cheap. The wages that somebody can get paid can be, let's say, I don't know, a couple of dollars a day or something, which in the Western world would be absolute exploitation. But over there, it might be in line with what they're being paid. So again, it gets to be a bit grey. So if they're importing all this merchandise, let's say, these garments from, I don't know where they're made. They could be made in the US, I have no idea. But my feeling is that a lot of these garments, as the whole fashion industry, it's usually made in India, Pakistan, somewhere in Africa, the Far East, maybe Turkey or somewhere like that. Workers are paid a lot less over there. Manufacturing is really tight, and the unit cost of these things is a lot less than they could be produced in, let's say, in the Western world, in Europe, let's say, or in the US. Therefore, you know, again, this is where it gets a little bit grey. A company like Harley Davidson will go to their source provider, who provides them with t-shirts, let's say, and they'll say, well, okay, we need to inspect your premises. Yeah, okay, yeah, no modern slavery going on here. But who's providing the provider? Who's providing the provider of the provider? Do you know what I mean? And that's how tricky it can get, how far down the supply chain you go. So I wasn't surprised that Harley Davidson had this policy. In fact, I wasn't surprised that any corporation had this policy, because they have policies on lots of things: corruption, anti-bribery, modern slavery, all this kind of stuff. But you kind of wonder, actually, especially within the automotive industry now and electronics industry, where raw materials or the supply of raw materials have been severely affected the last couple of years. And we know this, certainly, like companies like Apple have said this as well. You know, microchips have been a real issue over the last year or so, especially that has come to light. That you think, actually, this could be happening, and maybe not many people are aware of it, or they're catching it too late, and that's why they had to take drastic action. Or suddenly they say, no, we have to stop here, we have to suspend operations, let's say. I'm not saying it's happened, but it could happen, and this is where companies may be having a difficult time right now, and to try and keep in line with legislation and their own policies, but also trying to still gather those raw materials, or the providers of the provider are still trying to provide those raw materials and those components, so everything keeps on ticking along in the automotive manufacturing process, as it were. But as I say, do your own research, have an internet search and you'll see all the policies and all the wording, and it's all legitimate. There's no issue there at all. But what I'm saying is that right at the very start of this long chain, there could be some issues that have developed over the last couple of years, as they're going from one provider to another, just so they can keep that chain going, as it were. Anyway, I'll let you decide for yourselves, but I'm certainly not suggesting that there definitely has been involved in any kind of modern slavery here, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they've come across it and they've had to act upon it. Let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, like and share. Check out the website, RevelatorAlf.com. Ta-da!
RevelatorAlf.